Welcome, and today I'm going to show you one of my guided watercolors. This is the guiding part of the guided watercolors. I decided to call them guided watercolors instead of beginning watercolor because I find that the beginner is sometimes a little bit off-putting, but the guided just means that you don't have to start from scratch. And what I found with these watercolors was that people were getting really frustrated with the drawing part of learning how to paint in watercolor. And because they were so frustrated with the drawing part, I thought, okay, well, I can solve that by actually pre-drawing some things on watercolor paper. And so I devised a plan and a way of drawing things out and then being able to transfer them onto watercolor paper. And then you get to concentrate just on the drawing. So if you buy a guided watercolor kit from me, this one here is, I call him my Moon Hare. So this is more of a hare than a rabbit. It's Year of the Rabbit this year, so this is I have lots of rabbits at the moment. And if you buy this one, what you get in the kit is, this is 300 gram, 100% cotton watercolor paper and hot press, and it's got the hare already printed out on it. Now that's an A5 piece of paper, so it's half of an A4. So it's just the right size to be able to complete it in a couple of minutes and not too long, not too short, but challenging enough to make it interesting. You also get what we call a dot card. These are cards that I prepare with, I think these are Holbein watercolors. And you have the colors that you need in order to make the rabbit. Now this one also needs this yellow color, this yellow gold. But this comes from Hong Kong Color Lab. This is a lady in Hong Kong who makes her own paint, and she does an amazing job. So this is what you get in the kit. Not included, but also needed, is a paintbrush. I have a number 2 series, and I have a number 6. I've got some clean water, and I also need a tissue. And that's all I need in order to paint this and to start on my watercolor journey. So if you're ready, we'll get started. Here is I'm right-handed, so I put things over on the right. This is the one that I'm going to follow, and you can go online and you can find these on my website. They're on www.senselessart.net, and you can find them on there underneath other stuff. There's all the sample pieces that I've already painted, so you can see what they look like. And then I'm just going to arrange my area a little bit more here. I'll take the water off because it's big and I have a tendency of knocking it over. I'm going to get my paintbrushes wet. Now, when you're working with a watercolor paintbrush, they're the round paintbrushes. Generally, that's what we're looking for today. A round paintbrush that comes to a tip at the end, and that means that it holds lots and lots and lots of water. It's a good idea to get student quality or artist quality if you can. This one's not a particularly expensive one, and it's made, I'm not actually sure what it's made from, but it's quite a nice one. It's a Dale Rowney number 6 round Aquafine, made for watercolor painting. And then you have your dot card. Everything to do with watercolor paper is to do with water, and hence the name, right? And so the first thing that we're going to actually do is get the paper a little bit wet. And you might want to play, you can even play on the back of the paper because it doesn't come through the paper, but you might want to just have a quick go and see what it feels like, and then let that completely dry before you start again. Now these are printed, so you will get some bleeding from the printer ink, but the printer ink is quite faint, so it just gives a tiny little darkened tint to it. Nothing too serious. And I just want to put a layer of water around the whole rabbit. So I'm just going to put a layer of water around the face, and I'm going to stop at the cheek there because I want to give myself a break. I don't want to do too large of an area because that becomes quite stressful. So I want to kind of break things up into chunks. And the first color I'm going to lay down is this raw umber here. And I want that color to be fairly light. I don't want to scare myself with too much color right at the beginning, so I'm actually just putting a wash of this on. Just seeing how that goes. Nothing too serious, just let your brush kind of wander in and out and have a little go. I've got some little white bits and some, I don't know, paler bits. I've left the center of the ear open a little bit. I'm going to leave that a little bit lighter, I think. On here I actually have a little bit of red, which I forgot to include in the kit. but I will be including in further kits. I just forgot to do it on this one. I have a tiny little dot of it here from some leftover ones that I'll add in later. Okay, so just lay down a little bit of color on here. And I don't want the color to be too smooth. If I make it really smooth, then the color becomes too smooth. And that's not so good. I want it to be a little bit more patchy, a little bit more organic. I want the rabbit to look more like a rabbit than a plush toy. And then I'm going to go through. I'm putting quite a lot of water on my brush because I want to really load that paper with lots of water to start with. There we go. Now this hare has quite skinny little front legs, but I can change that up a little bit if I want to by adding more fur to it. Again, I'm going to go in here and pick up color with this brush and just lay some down on here. You'll hear the traffic outside. It's rush hour traffic time right now, so everybody's honking. My studio is quite busy a lot of the time outside. We've got to live on quite a busy road. And however, during the day, during the working day, I also have construction going on right now, which makes it even louder. So I have a tendency of recording in the evening. It's also slightly easier for me to control the lighting and things like that in the evening. So there we go. I've got the first layer of color laid down. And I'm pretty happy with that. I like that it's a little bit blotchy. It's a little bit not quite even. Now, as I said, on this particular one, I've forgotten to add the red, but I will be adding the red to further ones. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of red from my other page over there. And it's just a tiny bit. I'm going to throw it in here for the inside of the ear there. There we go. That's all I'm going to use that red for. Done with that. And I can change quite a bit about the rabbit as I'm going along by changing how much water I have on my brush and how much pigment I have, or how much paint I have. Okay, so now I want to be careful because I don't know if you can see this, but there's quite a lot of water on there at the moment. And I want to just make sure that that goes down a little bit before I add more onto it, just so that it doesn't become oversaturated and I have to wait a really long time. Now this was the raw sienna that I used first, and you'll notice that I didn't do anything with it down here. That's because the forelegs are coming forward and the back legs are going back. So I'm going to actually, again, lay down a layer of water down here. And then I'm going to use a little bit of the burnt sienna to put a bit more color in. And using the three sort of layers of browns really makes a bit of a difference in terms of how much fun I can have to play with the textures and this sort of thing. So I'm going to put a bit of burnt sienna in here. And that allows me to have this piece that moves backwards. You'll see me activating the color from here. To activate it, you just have to have a wet brush and give it a little rub. You use the tip of the brush when we're painting or when we're picking up color generally, and then the flat of the brush to move it around when we need to move it over larger distances. We'll see that when we make the moon shape here. It's quite a long distance and we want to make sure that's a little bit more shapely. If you feel like you can't estimate your color depth, you can also have another paper or something else. You'll hear the computer beeping in the background. Don't just ignore it. That's no big deal. But you can add color. You can have a little palette here. Sometimes I even use like a small side plate or something like that as a palette where I can mix my paints in. The paints that you have in the palette are an artist quality paint, and that means they're high in pigment and low in binder and filler. And so they have quite a good amount of pigment in it. That means there's lots of sort of room to, there's lots of color that goes onto it. Just even, you see me there, I just touch that with the tip of my brush and there's quite a lot of color comes out of it, right? So I want to add some of those in there. I'm going to start to add a little bit over here. This paper is very saturated right here, so I'm going to try and avoid that for a little bit. Sometimes those saturated areas really pull your attention, which is at times somewhat frustrating. And each rabbit's going to look a little bit different. I'm not going to try and copy this one because, well, my rabbit's different each time, you know. The one thing I do like about this one is he's got quite a smiley face on him, but each rabbit's different, so I'm happy to go with a different look each time. But what I want to make sure that I do is sort of look and see the way that the fur goes. So on a rabbit or a hare, the fur grows kind of, if you think of it, from the nose to the tip of the ears, and then from the nose downwards. So I don't want anything going crosswise on the nose, and I want to kind of make sure that my brush strokes go a similar way to the way that the rabbit fur goes. That really helps to give the illusion of fur and to give the illusion of shape and form. And those guys there are looking a little too regular for me, so I can go back on around them with a little bit more water again and just smooth them out. But I do want that texture on there, so I quite like that. I had a class at the studio on the weekend, and they were really, really lovely. And one of the ladies, this is the best thing about classes, one of the ladies did a really lovely thing around her rabbit, which I'm going to try and remember to do later on. We'll see if it works. Now, I want to make sure that when I'm doing these furry bits, they're not too regular. I don't want to end up with something that's always the same. It's not a very good demonstration if you can't see it. That's always the same like this, because it looks very mathematical. I want to end up with something that's a lot more loose and flowing, like a real rabbit might be. It's got too much water in it. So that I can give this sort of illusion of the rabbit being nice and fuzzy. Because let's face it, we all kind of want to snuggle up to a rabbit, don't we? Rabbits are awesome. Well, unless you live in Australia, in which case they're not, but they're also delicious. I didn't say that out loud. Okay, so now I've got a little bit of texture. Starting to be able to add a little bit of fur onto the rabbit. Again, the fur in the front kind of goes towards the center, but also kind of goes towards the legs a little bit. So I can add, and I'm just using that tip of the brush there. And I might just change now to my other brush, which I thought was a 2, but is actually a 1. So it's smaller than the one that you're most likely using. But that's okay. It's only a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to activate a bit of that. Activating means you're rubbing it and getting like a nice bit of pigment ready to go there. And I'm going to bring that along here. I want to draw that line around the rabbit so it really distinguishes it, but I don't want to just draw a line around it. So I'm going to give it this little kind of rough outline. And that rough outline, something about painting is, if you want to paint a straight line, make it broken, and it will look straighter than if you try and paint it just a plain old straight line. As I'm going through, I might throw in a little bit of that raw umber again every once in a while, just to unify things, and a little bit more of the burnt umber, and then go back and throw some more sepia in there. The darkest colors usually near the bottom, the lighter colors closer to the top, or where you think light is going to strike the rabbit. And a little bit more down here. Now that looks very dark when I put it on, but it's going to dry a bit lighter because it's got a lot of water in it. The water does make it look a little bit darker as you put it on, but it's surprisingly light when it dries up. You can see down here, this is already pretty dry. But he's looking suitably furry now, much furrier than he was before. But now, of course, I've made this lighter than this front part, so I'll have to go back once the front part's dry and go back in and sort of correct that side of things and make a little bit more darkness at the bottom. Okay. Now I'm making them significantly hairier than this one. Hairier, did you get that? And I've decided too on both of them that the light comes more from this back side than the front. Well, obviously there's a giant moon behind them, but also from this side. Even though the moon's on that, it's complicated. But don't worry too much about it. Look, it's a rabbit. Have fun with it. Paint, see how you get along. See what you like and what you don't like about it. You know, stop every once in a while and look and say, oh, actually, I think I need some more fur over there, right? Enjoy your process. Listen to a podcast, watch a TV show. Whatever it is that you're going to do. And a little bit more down here. This is watercolor paper that I put it on this time, though I might change that up later on. So it also takes quite a lot of abuse. Watercolor paper, good watercolor paper is made from 100% cotton. If it doesn't say 100% cotton on the front of your watercolor paper, it's most likely cellulose. It will still say acid-free and artist quality, but cellulose paper is really difficult to work with in watercolor. At least I think so. It gives you all these hard edges. It's not forgiving. It chews itself up. It's just disappointing. It's just disappointing. If you want to be really discouraged when you start watercolor, use cellulose. At least that's my opinion. Okay, so I'm fairly pleased with how that looks. Yeah, I like the way it goes. Each time it's a little bit different, and each time I learn a little bit about what I like and what I don't like about it. I could also point out all the things that I wish I'd done and not done, like maybe put another wash on it before I started. That would have been good, but I didn't, and that's just the way things are. Okay. Now I think I'm going to get started on these ears up here. I may have to pull this down just a little bit so I don't put my hand in my palette. And maybe do something with this nose, which has gotten a little bit out of hand, hasn't it? I would like that nose to be like this time, but then I really like the way that sort of his little furry mustache. I want that to be more longer and furrier this time. There. I like that, yeah. I've been recording videos for school projects. For schools have commissioned me to record various videos and a lot of craft things for younger kids, and it's been really, really fun. But of course I have to be, I talk all the time, all the time. And it can get a bit distracting at times, to be honest. So no matter what color you use and how you want to paint it, it's really just how you feel about it and how you feel the painting's going. Something to remember about watercolor is until it's fully dry, and by fully I mean like, you know, a couple weeks old, it's pretty removable. So for example, say I don't really love the way I've done this bit around here. I feel like it's gotten really messy and muddy. I can either wait and while it's still wet, go back and take a little bit of it out with my tissue. I can even use some water and pull a little bit of that up. So you can actually pull the color out like that. Though I didn't want the color pulled out of there. You can pull the color out of there. I can move this around. So there's a little bit of a hard edge on that one. I'm just going to take it down with quite a dry brush, give it a little scrub, and it comes off quite nice. Now I quite like these cheeks in here too. Give those nice long strokes. And these cheeks in here, just a little bit less. There's a little bit there, over here. Okay. Now I'm going to do a little bit around here. See that nice solid line? That wasn't that great of an idea. I really should have done a more broken line like this. I'm not going to color that eye in just yet because I've got something a little bit, or rather maybe I should go and do the eye now so it's got time to dry. Here we go. Activate a bit of that yellow and just get that eye really colored in. Now, even if I go over the lines or whatever like this, it doesn't really matter that much because I can go back and paint over top of it with a darker color. Usually with watercolor, we're painting light to dark. You saw me putting on the lighter color first and then the darker color afterwards. There's a reason for that. It's harder to take off the darker color than it is to take off the lighter one. Now I'm going to go back, and with this smaller brush, I can get these different sort of strokes in. So you can see I can leave a little bit more white around it. That emphasizes the dark around it. And I can maybe leave a little bit of splashes of color showing through, which makes for a much nicer bottom part. But I'm just darkening those parts up so that they are further back, more in shadow. There we go. Might give them a little bit of more hair here. I like that hair sort of shape. Now when I'm doing something like the ears, I might even want to turn my paper like this because I want to be able to get that shape up in here. I want to be able to get that shape. And just kind of, there we go. In the ears, I do want quite a lot of that sort of furriness to show through. You'll see I'm switching between the sepia and the the burnt umber to give myself a little bit of variation. There we go. And go back to the burnt umber. Give it a little bit more color in there. Yeah, this is just a fun little project. It's introduction to watercolor, lets you figure out how the paint moves and how the color moves and how you can control and manipulate your color in order to do what you want it to do. So it's quite a nice way of just getting used to the color and used to the idea of watercolor. First time you paint it, it might be really light, but you can always go back and add more to it. It's very easy to overpaint things in watercolor, but for something like a furry creature like a rabbit, it's much harder to overpaint. And you know, overpainting's not the world's worst thing. Sometimes it's just fine too. There we go. Okay. Oh, I like how that little rough, I like the whiteness of this rough down here. I'm going to completely leave that and see how it goes. And I'm going to, now I like the little sparkle in the rabbit's eye. You have two choices for that. You can leave a dot, or you can add a dot of white onto it from a white marker or chalk or whatever you've got. it really does help to make your animals look a lot more alive, and people too. It works for people as well. So I very carefully just draw around that dot. I think I'm going to leave. Last time I did quite a dark line around there, and this time I think I'm going to make a thinner line. And just kind of cover up the pencil line, but leave a little bit of white around it. And I'm also going to go back in and do kind of dot in around that nose. Like that. Now I'm going quite quickly through this. When you're doing it, especially the first time you do watercolor or the first time you try this kind of painting, you're not going to go this fast because you're going to want to stop and look and just test and see where you've gotten to, see where that goes. I'm just putting a few dots of color in around here so it's not quite so white because it's very stark. I want it to be quite white, but not quite that white. Okay, I'm pretty pleased with how that rabbit's looking so far. Looks pretty good. Not quite as intense as this one because there's not so much eyeliner. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to paint the moon. And in order to paint the moon, I'm going to take my brush with some water on it, clean water. Brush is nice and clean. Clean water, not dripping off, but quite wet. And I'm going to go near it, but not quite on it. So I don't touch the paint that's already on the rabbit, especially if you are painting and it's still a little bit wet on the rabbit. You don't want it to, go over top of it because it will just grab hold of that paint and pull it onto the moon. And then your rabbit will be disappearing into the moon, which, I mean, maybe you want that. I don't know. But if you don't want that, there we go. There's some more cars beeping outside the studio. Okay. There we are. So that's the first. I'm not going to do the other half yet because I want to be able to control the water. And if I do the other half, then I've got a lot to deal with all at once. I'm going to activate a lot of this color. And you can see I'm getting it right into the brush this time. It's really saturated into there. And I'm going to put it on. Now I could go all the way around in strokes, but I actually want my moon to be almost patchy, like the real moon looks. When people can see things into it, I want my big yellow harvest moon to be a little bit more patchy. So, the year of the rabbit is upon us in the Chinese zodiac for the Lunar New Year. And I am a rabbit, so I've been trying to find the most fearsome and defiant looking rabbits that I can, because a rabbit horoscope is not particularly exciting ever. It's usually rabbits are timid and rabbits are quiet and wily and things like that. They're never like rabbits are ferocious, because I suppose the nature of a rabbit isn't really thought of as very ferocious, but honestly, I think it's pretty ferocious. Like, you gotta, if you don't think a rabbit's ferocious, you haven't met very many rabbits. Okay, now I've got a piece here I don't love, so I'm just gonna go through and bring that down. Because my paper's pretty wet, that's very acceptable. And you'll notice that I'm leaving a big space here. That's because I have a bit of this gold in here. This gold is from HK Color Lab, brilliant Hong Kong company, and they make their own colors here in Hong Kong. And now this has got mica in it, which is what gives us that sparkly, sparkly, sparkly. But that also means that when you're activating it, you have to activate it fairly aggressively. Like, you have to really rub it. You have to convince it to come out. But once it comes out, whoo, it's gorgeous. So I'm throwing that on in this empty space so that my moon glows. I found if I try and make a solid color of gold this big, then what I really should have done is use gold leaf. This is just not the right, you know, paint is not the right medium for that kind of thing. So instead, I'll go back and pick up some yellow. Instead, I just like to throw some of that gold in to give you a shimmer. Do remember, once you've touched the gold, you will find tiny bits of gold all over your paintbrush until you wash it really thoroughly. Now, that's not usually a huge problem, but just in case it bothers you, no. There we go. There we are. Okay, that looks okay. Not too bad. And then I'm going to do this other side. Again with the water. Just getting that a bit wet so that the paint slides around really nicely. Activate quite a lot of that yellow. And you can see I'm being much more aggressive with the yellow than I've been with any of the other paint. And that's just because I want lots of it and I don't mind it all over my brush. If you're finding it's not sliding around enough, add more water. It's called watercolor for a reason. And I can use the very tip of my brush to get it quite close. Or I can just let it slide on the side and use that side too. And why not add just a little bit more of that gold right down here by the shoulder while it's still nice and wet. Okay. All right, last but not least, a little bit of background in here. You notice that I've left a line of white around here. I just like that. I just like it. My student this weekend left a full line all the way around, and it was really, really nice. Now, you'll notice I didn't wet the paper first before doing this one. That's partially because the inside is still a little bit wet, and I don't want to accidentally get it in there, and partially because this is a background color, so I'm actually going to kind of make just a bit of a splooshy mess over here. So I put it on, put the color on, and then I'm just pulling it down here so that you don't get that line around the side, but I want it to be a little bit more loose around the bottom. Don't necessarily. This one I painted all the way to the edges, and that can look nice too. But this time I think I'm going to leave it more open. Yeah. Kind of like that. Maybe a few lines in here, suggestive of grass. So a lot of pigment right on the tip there. I like that. And I'm going to add a little bit of brown up here at the top, the sepia brown. But for this one, I'm going to really, really lighten it up with water. So just a tiny bit to suggest some darkness around here. In the sky. Not much. There's a little bit of hard edge on that edge there. Take that down with some water. And I think I'm pretty satisfied with that. So there you go. Now, because I'm me, after I finish with that and I let it dry for a minute, I like to give it a stamp because I've made myself a chop. It looks a little bit like, kind of made it to sort of mimic a Chinese watercolor or artist style chop, but mine is clearly not. It's just the name of my studio, but in the square format, and like that. So there you go. That is how to paint this wild hare and the moon in one particular way.